They are working.
Dang. Every time.
We're just super quiet.
Question of the day. How much does a polar bear weigh?
900 pounds.
Enough to break the ice.
Oh, dang. Though, curiously, if you ever find yourself starving to death and you take down a polar bear, don't eat its liver.
Is this set up to a punchline, or is this serious advice?
No, actually, don't eat its liver. Most animals, like if you were nutrient deprived, going for the liver would be like a adrenaline shot. But polar bears' livers are so vitamin packed, they actually make you go toxic and you die. Even like a beef liver has something like 3,000 times the daily needed B12 vitamins, and vitamin A and other stuff. It's like a superfood, but apparently polar bears is like off the charts. You just go toxic and die. How's that for breaking the ice? Jeez.
There's nothing fun about this fun fact.
No, there's not.
Looks like our first two agenda items already merged. Might be a quick agenda item. They both look good to me. I was just dragging my feet because I wanted to pull down the repo and double check everything.
Oh, those are mine. Yeah. Thanks, everyone, for looking and approving. And we still have time. If you have issues with them after the fact, we still have time before a release to fix up wording or examples or whatever.
Yeah, nothing jumped out to me of any issues over there. I liked it.
We're going to determine access to the community channels.
And that leaves issue 999 on the agenda.
I think that's why John went ahead and merged the other two PRs. He was like, I want all the time for this one.
GCP, they both have sandbox environments.
Thanks, Ram Kumar.
Hello.
Okay.
Hello.
Tea or coffee, John? Looks like a tea bag. Yeah.
Indeed. Check it out.
Blurry, blurry, blurry. Wait for it. Oh, that's fancy. Etched metal. Jeez Louise.
Yeah, I know. One of those is a external Google team logo. The other one is an internal one.
Don't show us proprietary stuff.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Stop leaks,
anyway.
John. Stop leaks.
Sorry. I'm here. I'm ready to argue with anybody. But also, I just added a different issue if we want to not argue about stuff.
That's fair. I have to low key laugh at myself with the thing about the subject pointing at manifests and being surprised about that. And your response was like, I mean, I like to laugh at myself for being an idiot and overlooking things, but it's really great to laugh at yourself in a forum of people. Like low key, if you haven't read the spec, you should go read the spec. So,
Yeah, I mean, it took me a couple years to actually sit down and read the stuff, and I realized a lot of things, and I think that's why I have strong opinions. I do think most people just haven't read the documents because you kind of assume what's in there and you understand.
well, and
that was
even to the nuance of those kind of points is, you know, has it was, I think a couple of people brought up something about like zero length data structures or nothing in the layers, and it was even like reading that line in the layers file of like that. I'll pull it up, but still, like rereading it, it was like I got two interpretations from the same sentence, and it was like I know what I've assumed that sentence to mean, but now I see that it could mean two different things. So sometimes even just getting exhausted reading and rereading it, then you find a new interpretation or something you didn't catch. So, yeah, go, John. You want to dive into things, because I could probably talk about some stuff, but
Yeah, we could talk about my distribution spec question briefly first, maybe. I asked about this because I think it's a mistake not to at least have a suggestion about how registries should behave. I know for like most garbage collection and that for most of those discussions, we've just kind of let that go because there's a lot of different behavior, and there was no guidance on how things should behave. And so different registries do different things. But if we're creating a new type of relationship between artifacts, I think it would be really nice for clients to have some kind of expectation, even if registries don't abide by that. Having a should in there would at least give registry implementers some clue versus just kind of guessing. There are two kind of, I guess, 2 or 3 points to this question. Like, a lot of registries enforce integrity of references between objects. By that, I mean, like, if you try to delete an image that is referenced by an index, it will fail in GCR because we don't want you to create an invalid index that will fail later on down the line. So we force you to basically walk the graph from the roots, deleting things if you actually want to delete stuff. So you have to explicitly delete tags that point to a thing, delete any indexes that point to a thing, and then you can actually delete the image. The other point is about like cleanup. So I think most registries do layer-based cleanup, where if there's no images referencing a layer, after some point those will get deleted. Other registries do like image-based cleanup where tags pin them, but if nothing is tagging an image, it may disappear, or if nothing has ever tagged an image, it may disappear. And then other registries would even expire tags after a certain amount of time. So I like if I delete something that is referenced via the subject field, should I expect that the manifest that references it will also go away, or is that a clue that it's eligible for garbage collection? Or should I be unable to delete something if it's referenced via the subject field? I'm not sure what most people would expect. I have opinions, but I'd like to not share them until other people have shared what they think.
Jason, I see your hand up, so go ahead.
I think the issue has mostly agreement. I don't know if John, if you have a specific way you are personally leaning, but I think the two comments are in agreement, and I am in agreement with them. I don't know if Brandon's about to blow it all up by disagreeing with all of us, but I think I agree that it would be nice for the spec to have a suggestion, and like you should in general expect the registry to operate this way. I think there's value in giving registries the ability to have different behavior if they feel like it. But I think you could say users should expect that deleting the thing doesn't delete all the refers to the thing. Check with your registry's documentation to see if that's true or not. But in general, that's the expectation you should come in with by default. I think that's worth spelling out. I agree with you, and I agree with that being the way that we spell it out.
Yeah, I think the policy we had kind of put in there was to say that if you have a subject that points to a manifest, that manifest exists, then you shouldn't delete the thing with the subject field, and as long as it's there. So we did the inverse. We said you need to keep this thing around as long as the original manifest you're pointing to still exists. We didn't specify the negation of that, of once you delete the manifest, what happens to the thing with the subject on it. And so, yeah, part of it we kind of deferred, that we don't want to define what a garbage collection policy looks like. And so I think that's where we get the abstraction or lack of detail here.
Yeah, I can go share some history on why GC was pulled out. It was again one of those contentious topics of how much do we wade into the whole garbage collection discussion with distribution spec, and hence we decided not to put it in at that point. The one scenario maybe I can talk about is when you wanted to copy content or push content, you wanted to push the subject, the signatures before you push the actual image. That was requested, and so the ability for the signature to exist pointing to an invalid subject was the primary driver for keeping that as an option in the registry to keep it there. Now, that said, right now, from ACR side, we don't implement it that way. We actually delete everything if the root is deleted, but we don't block on pushing it. So it's a little bit confusing and hard. And so guidance, and if we can get guidance into the spec, definitely that would be helpful for other implementers. So I love the fact that we're actually discussing an ability to put GC into it. Super excited.
Yeah, I remember the conversation about not wanting to rat hole down the GC rat hole. I think there is a good balance in saying registries can choose to GC however they, don't use that word, but like registries can delete stuff however they feel like. But in general, you should have the expectation that pushing a signature without the thing it signs is fine. Deleting the thing and keeping the signature is the expectation, unless the registry is not like non-conformant or uncompliant, but like unless that is the thing they do. But in general, you should expect that to be the case. I think that is the case for most things. I'm surprised it sounds like that ACR doesn't have that today, but there's still time to change it if we change the expectation in the spec.
No, you can push the subject in, but the point is if you delete the image, the entire graph gets to. So maybe that's something.
Yeah, that's the case I think specifically we're talking about. You can, part one is you can push a signature without the thing you're signing. You do that, that's great. Part two is when I delete the image, I think the expectation we should assume is that doesn't delete everything downstream. Maybe there's some force delete or crawl delete, do the whole thing, recursive delete, but that should be an explicit choice or an explicit behavior of the registry outside of the normal expectation.
Yeah, I think as long as you keep the language in the may range, right, and not say must, and you can talk about any patterns that would be successful, but you don't need to make it a must requirement, any garbage collection requirement.
Yeah, I saw that. Where is the language? Push something must. There's some must that you can push a thing with the subject. A registry must accept an otherwise valid manifest with a subject field that references a manifest that does not exist, allowing clients to push a manifest and refers to that manifest in either order. I am fine with this, but not. I don't like that this creates like a edge triggered thing versus a level triggered thing. Like, if I push this first and never push the thing that it references, then it'll stay forever. But if I push this Second, after that thing already exists and I delete the thing that exists, then okay, now it can get garbage collected. It's very strange to me that this is not level triggered behavior, because I don't know. I think I'm tainted by Kubernetes, but I don't love it. I don't like that behavior. I would like to change that.
A lot of the reasoning for saying that you can push the artifact with the subject on there first before you push the manifest was just knowing that there would be certain cases out there where you wanted to push a full unit of everything together. And so you didn't want the manifest to exist before all the metadata that pointed to that manifest exists. Same way you push all the blobs before you push the manifest that contains the blobs. And so it could be interpreted that we're just giving you wiggle room in terms of a short-term time frame, not in terms of longer-term garbage collection that would come up later on.
No, Brendan, I think there's another case that we're talking about where Cosign has this ability to store images in repo A or registry A and its signatures and SBOMs and etc. in registry B. So the signature won't just exist for a second before the manifest shows up. It will exist forever before the manifest shows up in that registry. I think that's something we need to support, like both in terms of the spec, which is satisfied today, but like our own expectations. It should be fine to have a registry full of nothing but signatures and nothing but SBOMs.
In those cases, I would lean toward tagging whatever it is that you want to have stick around.
Or not garbage collecting, but okay. Sorry, I jumped the hand line. I think Ramkumar, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so some of these discussions are so my suggestion is one person's trash is another person's treasure, right? So it's as far as the spec goes, I think it needs to be really strong and tight in terms of correctness, but lots of these discussions are best moved to a best practices guide. So if you do this, then this will happen and that kind of stuff. So I think these are two separate documents that must be developed. Rather than putting everything inside the spec. Just a suggestion.
Isn't the way that Cosign pushed signatures to another registry was mostly because of things like tag mutability concerns, right? Like they wanted, like, we have references, we don't need tags. Like, why do you need to have a separate repo for signatures only?
Handful.
Yeah, that was practically the reason. Yeah. Oh, sorry, John. I think Mo was about to say the same thing. Go ahead, John.
Yeah. I mean, one of them is that helps with tag immutability within a repository, but also it helps you sidestep the grossness of polluting your primary registry with a bunch of fallback tags. You can also
even aside from tagging. Yeah, I was going to say, even aside from tagging, it can be useful to say you are allowed to sign but not push images, or you are allowed, you have a process that pushes SBOMs but is never allowed to push, images. There's many solutions to that a registry could take, but practically with registries that exist in the wild today, separate repos, like repos are the IAM boundary. And so people, even aside from tag pollution and tag immutability, people might want to have a process that can push to tags over here, push manifests over here, referring to a repo elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, it seems as though in most cases you're going to want the artifacts to be cleaned up, and I guess I question why we, like, Cosign invented this approach of a second repo because of the same reason that we're creating reference types, like because there wasn't a way to do this, and so people were doing all these tags and we're having trouble with immutability, and we didn't want to have a bunch of digest tags in your main repo. All of that's going away with the refers API.
Yeah,
I would think of reference types as much more similar to like being part of the image. I would say they're things that are like related to the image and not very useful without the image, sort of like a layer is, except for you're able to add these after you create the image. And if you think of them that way, then once the image is deleted, why would you not delete the reference types? Maybe not immediately, but it seems fine to clean them up.
I mean, on the issue, I mean, Tianon puts forth a use case of, it would be useful to keep around S-bombs, even if you garbage collect the storage-wise expensive thing of the actual image. And I also think that like it is useful to keep around signatures for a lot of reasons, right? Like who signed this for investigation after something. I don't think it is obvious that you should always garbage collect things, and I wish there was a way to choose that. Like if we did something silly, like have a delete verb available on the refers path, that would be nice. But I just came up with this as maybe a terrible idea.
John, we actually wanted something like that where you could specify delete all children, but the delete APIs are not rich enough in distribution. I mean, we didn't want to touch that part and keep the refers as a small set as possible. That was, I mean, these were all discussions that we had as to how much do we expand the scope of this to get the proposal forward. But I think we're in the same boat where each registry will have to go introduce new flags saying delete everything, keep the image, keep the signatures. It is a very tough part right now. I mean, the number of conversations I've had with people who are implementing it is painful. So, but it was hindsight is the working group just wanted to scope it down. But if you want to kind of like look at delete path, I think that's definitely something we can.
I guess the reason this is kind of a sticking point for me is that I lost out on an argument where the justification was garbage collection and then garbage collection was punted. And so I feel like it's not finished, right? Like if an index can't have a subject, then I'm mad. Unless we like very explicitly explain like, oh yeah, this is how this works, and so that we can't.
Brandon, I think I disagree with your comment about if you liked it, then you should have put a tag on it. A lot of this work is here to prevent tag pollution. And so if the solution to this issue is to pollute your tags again, then I feel like we've done a lot of work and not moved that far forward. I can already put a tag on it today.
Only in the cases where you've got something that points to something that doesn't exist. If you've got something that's out there that points to something that does exist, and the thing you're pointing to exists with a tag on it already, you're going to keep that thing that does exist. You're going to keep the different artifacts that point to it.
My repo may be entirely things that point to things that don't exist or don't exist within that repo. And so every manifest I push has to be tagged. That's noisy and ugly, and we should strive to do better.
If you've got a repo that has nothing but stuff that points to other things don't exist, you would have a repo without any tags at all. You would never even query the tag listing at that point, right?
They exist so that I can query them via the references endpoint.
Right. Yeah. The use case would be like we discussed this in another place where you could have, this is the target repository that I need to look for references, and you have the digest and the entire query is by digest and not by tag at that point. But it is a referral API only repository. Again, how you manage this is a different problem. But
so like this kind of came up for me mentally when someone PR'd like registries may reject manifest that references things that don't exist. Like the ability to push a sparse thing, even not just a subject field, but say like an index that references manifests that don't exist. It's surprising behavior for that to work or not work if you expect the other thing. And so it would be great if there was a way for a client to be like, hey, I know this is broken. I know what I'm doing. Please just let it through anyway, because I'm prepared to deal with the consequences. It's kind of the same issue where like, yeah, I know the subject doesn't reference something. It's on purpose. I don't really have a good point to make there, but I feel like there's some problem to be solved, and I wish we could solve it. I encourage people to like disagree with me on this distribution spec issue, maybe in a way that I could think about long term. But yeah, I like, my opinion is that subject should be soft, and it should not delete. Registry should not delete things simply because they reference something that got deleted.
I think there's value in saying we have the opportunity to set a precedent or set an expectation for people, rather than punting it to whatever you want, which is like going to come back and cause complexity later for people. I think we don't need to say it's a must. We don't need to say it's a requirement, but I think we can say in general you should expect this to be the case, and people will thank us for it in the future, including ourselves.
So thinking of the scenario where you get the untagged stuff that gets deleted. I push v3 of an image, multi-platform image, has a whole bunch of manifest. All the manifests have signatures on them. But the only thing that was tagged was that original v3 tag at the top, and then someone pushes a new version of v3. So now I've got a manifest that's no longer tagged at all. And we got the logic out there today that says, hey, it's no longer tagged, let's delete the multi-platform manifest, the individual manifest for all the images, all their blobs. Do we have an automated way that you would then follow through with that and say, let's clean up the rest of it as well? Or are we saying that, no, you shouldn't clean up the rest of that, all the signatures have to stay around?
I don't know that they have to stay around, but like, my thought here is there are registries with existing behavior, and I don't want those to change. So like, if you're not tagging your artifacts, and the tag moved from the manifest that referenced that thing, then I would expect those things to get cleaned up, right? If your registry deletes things that aren't tagged, then I would expect that to apply still. But if your registry does not delete things that aren't tagged, then I would be surprised if deleting the subject cascaded to the artifacts.
That case I'm completely in agreement with. If registries have different policies of what they clean up, and that's perfectly reasonable to me that someone would make a registry a different policy.
Yeah, and if you're explicitly like, so if there's a policy that cleans up the subject, then that policy very likely will apply to the artifacts as well, right? If there's not a policy that cleans up the subject, then I would expect things to stay around forever. But if there's not that policy, then you're explicitly deleting a thing, right? That action is intentional, and I think that you could make that deletion of all of its referrers to also be intentional, right? Maybe that doesn't make sense, but I feel like if a user's taking an action, like, oh, I want to delete this, then they could also express it and everything that references it.
So it sounds like we're in agreement then, right? That we can make the language a little bit more may, but then bring in, if you're going this route, should, and if you're going a different route, it should do something different. Can you draft the text for that? And is that the last thing, or the only thing that was blocking this 999 PR for reverting the artifact manifest?
Oh, these are unrelated.
Unrelated completely. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we still have drama all over the place, but for this one, the way I was leaning was just to say, this is what we expect registries to keep. And so we specify, if you've got a tag manifest, it has a signature pointing to it. We expect you to keep that signature, even if the signature itself isn't tagged directly. everything else I would leave up to a policy by registry. Because I can see that some registries will want different policies in those cases. There are places where people want to clean up a lot of stuff. There are other places where people don't want to clean up a lot of stuff.
Yeah. I think the point I want to make is that deleting the subject is not itself a like garbage collection signal. But you know, if you have deleted all the roots for everything, and your process would delete these artifacts, of course it's going to. But I don't think deleting the subject should be a positive signal of like, oh, I need to delete these artifacts.
Do we have language in there for doing that with blobs? You delete a manifest, you go through and delete the blobs after that.
I don't think we do. And
yeah,
I do think like the current way to do this manually would be to use the refers API and issue separate deletes for everything, which is like kind of a pain. I think adding a delete all referrers would be a good API, but I don't know. Vincent, did you raise your hand or did you move your boom out of the way?
I was starting to say something, but I mean, even when that's come up before and like people get into like describing rough counting of that, like all the manifests that point to a blob and, like rough counting, you can delete them. And then it's been garbage collection's been kicked out of the conversation so long. It's kind of very much a choose your own adventure.
Yeah, I think the change I would like to see is this clause in the push section of the distribution spec about how a registry must accept it even if it doesn't exist. I think that should be made a little bit more generic about how like if the subject doesn't exist, that's okay. That's not invalid, and deleting the subject doesn't invalidate the reference.
So a may instead of a must there, and then some statement about not being invalid.
Yeah, I mean, I'm okay with keeping this for the sake of like pushing signatures prior to pushing the image, but I'd also like some language around like registry should allow this to continue to exist, even if the subject is deleted. That may be under like a delete section or something. It's just we kind of punted on the rest of it because so much of that behavior is already cemented and customers expect one or the other. But I would like to be able to have some sense of what's going to happen when I delete stuff.
The other challenge is if we don't delete the graph or give an API that says delete the entire graph, you would have to walk through each one of them. So let's say you have an SBOM and you have a signature attached to an SBOM. You then need to do referrers of referrers. So it gets a little hard. A per registry flag is one option. Then you end up, can you do it per repository? And then you end up, can you do it per image and request? So ideally, if the API was defined well enough to say that image or subject plus everything just go away, or subject and ignore all the referrers, something like that, that would be more my preference, honestly, rather than leaving it up to a may. But again, we might not solve this at this point, but these are the other problems that come as soon as we leave the subjects and their referrers hanging around.
Yeah, I also might support like a header that says, hey, delete everything else. I don't care. Delete everything that's valid. I don't know. I want to hash that out a little bit. I think this is not that important. Like I'm fine to maybe like still cut the API and have this maybe as part of a guidance section. But yeah, I think we kind of talked this point to death. I'd be interested in more written arguments for or against, or what people would actually like to see.
I feel like everywhere else in the spec, we've left this so undefined. If you delete an index, doesn't go out and delete all the manifests the index points to. So it feels like it fits under that same model of whatever GC policy or registry has for dealing with that after the fact. You can follow up with that after the fact. It's not an explicit, you delete the top thing and all the bottom things get deleted.
Yeah, but again, I'm mad that an index can't have a subject because we punted on this. We didn't punt on it. So we can't punt on it and also make it a very important design decision, in my opinion. Like we have an opinion, but then we also don't have an opinion in a completely different context. And that's like, oh,
I have
the
a strong
guidance-
opinion. I don't know where to write it.
Write it in this issue, and then I'll tell you what to do.
I've put in a bunch of issues. The index having a subject, I've put in a few places it's come up, but I don't know where to put it in the spec itself. And it needs to go in the spec somewhere, I think, because people keep asking the question for good reasons.
I think because the answer is wrong.
Jason, you're muted. I don't know if you're trying to talk to us or not.
He doesn't want to talk to us. He was also
I
chewing
think
some
it's
food.
because we're overloading index.
I feel like it's either Mike or Mike that should talk next.
I think that we have seen registries implement different GC, like, you know, the way Docker Hub cleans up images is different than the way ECR cleans up images. And so I guess figuring out how to specify GC without making one registry or another out of spec seems maybe one of the reasons why we just haven't done it. I'm curious for, I don't know if I necessarily agree that we have to solve all of the GC problems at once. Like I think we should just focus on subject for now and whether or not references should get cleaned up. And I'm curious whether, I don't know, I think the way we've been thinking about it would be that reference types get cleaned up by default, and maybe eventually we're able to turn that off for people who really want these, what I think is going to be the smaller number of use cases where you want to have a repo full of just signatures. You could have a setting on the repo or a flag on the registry or something that says don't do this for this repo, this is just for signatures. But I don't understand why we want to say registries can't clean up orphaned signatures automatically, because I think it is a useful feature for most of the use cases that I've heard.
I don't know that anybody was arguing that. Was anybody saying that registries must retain these things? I think we were just saying that we have the opportunity to put in language that says you should have the expectation that a registry keeps it around. However, consult your registry's implementation. Maybe do something else.
Yeah, that would be good text.
Yeah, I think it is often the case that when I delete the subject, I want everything else to go. But I don't think it's always the case, which is why this is something we're arguing about, I think.
I think that the thing I'm interested in is like a new registry implementation wants to come into existence. They read the spec, they implement. They get to a point where they say, okay, I'm deleting a manifest. Do I have to delete its subjects? Maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't. And if we can put a little nudge in there, one way or the other, then I think it's worth nudging for sort of uniformity of implementation. Not a must, not a should, just may or something. I don't know. Maybe we've talked about this too long. Maybe we could also get to the main event if we want, or talk about anything else.
Do we have other things we disagree on?
Good one.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think most people are coming at this with an opinion of what they want to do if they were to implement it. And I'm not totally convinced that the spec needs to tell people which one of those views is correct. And so like a may or a, hey, this is this is something you should document and think about, and maybe provide a way for your users to configure if you want to. But I don't know if I don't know if I see it as like all registries should always not clean up references.
Yeah, as Brandon was saying, I think the intent of the work group was to allow the push scenario where, like with index, you can push the images later, right, or the blobs later. You don't have to have a particular sequence. It's over a particular point in time, and it's really very registry dependent, right? Then that's fine. So some more may language needs to be there, and just disqualify it for the purpose of push. It should, right, support this kind of scenario, or some other similar scenario whereby you can get all your subjects, push at the same time that the image is being pushed up. Brandon, would you be acceptable of that kind of language, just more May language there? Or
Yeah, I'm fine with more May language. I link it up when we think of the delete side of this to the same as when you delete an index. Do you delete all the manifest? When you delete a manifest, do you delete all the blobs? We haven't really defined that before either. And we've always left it up to the registry of, if you're going to do a lazy GC, that's up to you as a registry. If you're not going to GC, it's up to you as a registry. If you're going to be more proactive, that's your choice as well.
Yeah, those are more hub APIs, not. It's similar to the auth issue and namespace issue. We're trying not to restrict the registries. You guys want to move on to the 999 then, or?
I was about to say, I think we have effectively crammed the whole discussion for 999 down to 15 minutes. So achievement unlocked.
I have written responses at length. No one seems to be addressing most of my points, and I'm happy to argue or not argue, whatever.
I think my read of the situation, tell me if I'm wrong, is that you've got some issues that you'd like to discuss with the work group, but the work group is dissolved. Is that inaccurate?
Not really. I mean, I think that I mean, there are still people here from the work group, but I would say, the output of the work group is a proposal for the maintainers to assess, and I have assessed it. And yeah, maybe the work group having been dissolved is part of the problem, but yeah, we're like got to a point where now I, don't approve of it, and that makes me a bad guy, but I think that that's like part of the process. So here we are. Josh.
All the points aside, there was one thing that John said in the last comment on the thread, which was releasing image and distribution separately. And I just wanted to gauge people's thoughts on that. I know a lot of marketing stuff is OCI 1.1, but that's definitely something that we could do. Or is it not?
Well, when you say separately, obviously there are dependencies in the distribution spec on the artifact, manifest being there currently in the image.
So I will double check, but I actually am not sure that that's the case. I think that it actually just talks about subject field and refers. So artifact manifest would have a subject field if it goes in. If it doesn't, I think all of distribution spec still applies. I think the big downside would be, okay, people want to launch. We have support for OCI 1.1, and now we have made it even more confusing for what that means. I'm just saying there doesn't seem to be any arguments from anyone about what's come from reference types group into distribution spec, and we could cut the final RC today and just like start doing stuff instead of being in the gridlock.
I mean, we could
With the
certainly
power
put it to a
vested in
vote.
me. Yeah.
I think that John's a maintainer on the distribution spec as well. Would he approve that one, but not the image spec? I'm
Yeah,
not.
I don't really have any problems with the distribution spec beyond the, thing we just spent 30 minutes talking about. But
Okay.
that's not really a blocker for me.
So where will we keep the definition of artifacts? Or are we not, are we saying that images would now become artifacts in this release of the distribution spec? I mean, there is some text in there, I'm sure.
So, and I'm reading Aaron's points here. So the idea of an artifact, artifact as an image, I think is described in the refers API. Maybe
as a backup. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, and I opened an issue last week in Rage on the artifacts repo to remove it because I'm being asked by people like to review wiki pages about artifacts, and we're still having links out to that. And I think if we just put a paragraph that's like OCI artifacts probably means this, unless you're thinking of this, and distribution spec talks about pulling out config media type. It doesn't mention that means artifacts, but that is how you can get artifact type into the refers response. And artifact type is described in the refers response, which is in distribution spec. So maybe there's not enough language in distribution spec about OCI artifacts.
There are a couple of places where the manifest is called out, example and links and things like that. So
Okay.
you'd have to know if you wanted
Right.
to.
That being said, I never mind. Actually, I'm done.
To me, it feels as though just releasing the distribution spec by itself is effectively releasing 1.1, but removing the artifact manifest. Like, I think if we really want to just move forward, I don't know. I think we should just do that sort of openly and say we're going to take artifact manifest out of this release because we can't figure it out, and we have agreement on the rest of the stuff, and we should do a 1.1 release in both of these specs, because I don't know, it's just something about saying there's a subject descriptor that's in manifests, but we're not actually specifying it where we specify manifests because we don't want to rip out the artifact manifest. Seems, I don't know. It seems like we should do this in a way that is a little clearer, and I think it's more clear if we have releases of the manifest changes and the API changes, and then we can kind of go back to the drawing board about how we define artifacts in the future.
If we're going to order these, I think you'd want to release image spec before distribution spec, because distribution spec is pointing back to the subject field. So without that defined in a spec, I don't know how you implement the refers API without having the subject field defined somewhere.
Yeah, I felt the goal would be to have a simultaneous release, not a split. Once the work group decided to hit both specs.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
John, are you asking for artifacts to move somewhere else, or are you asking for more discussion in the image spec on the content of the artifacts manifest with the possibility of adding additional enhancements to it?
I mean, have you read my comments?
Yes.
I think we should remove it. I don't think we should have it. I think that would be better to add language around the image manifest to enable the same things the artifact manifest would enable.
Is that because of the rejection of the additional artifact type configs, or is that you just see it as those things as annotations or whatnot?
It is the churn on the ecosystem, both registry and client side, that I think is not worth the very small benefit.
Why do you think it's a small benefit, all these new artifact types?
I think John has gone over this numerous times. I think John has said his point numerous times. Go read the thread, please.
Yeah.
Oh, I read the thread.
There are a couple of, Mike, there are a couple of hands up. Vincent, I think, is next in line, or maybe Cody.
Toddy is, but
okay.
Thanks, folks. I will continue to disagree that there is a small benefit on the artifact, and I want to make that clear. But I think Brandon had a proposal last week, and I just want to bring that again. So what about just updating the wording in the spec and saying that if you use artifact types, that will not be compatible with all the registries, so registries that do not support. For me, that's kind of the go forward work that we can do, and be explicit by saying, look, if you use that thing, you will not be able to actually save those things in all the registries. And then we leave it to the implementers to make that decision whether they want to support actually all registries and not. I just wanted to bring that one.
I think that's 1004 that John's also got open, and VBATS has a comment on there to change the wording a little bit, and I agree with that change of the wording.
My only concern with that as a solution, quote unquote, to the problem is that OCI's values are for portability. It's written in the charter. And so if we start to say, if you care about portability, because we don't, if you care about portability, then do this, as opposed to saying we are formally, in the charter, in our blood, care about portability. It feels like an abdication of our job. I say our, but maintainers, image spec maintainers, and actual OCI folks.
Vincent, you got your hand up.
yeah, I don't know. Not in a depressing or morose way. I just I wasn't hardly joking when it was like it was painful, and there are still places, like John said. I don't disagree with what John's saying of the ambiguities around it, and I feel like this whole thing is honestly more of a perception issue than a technical issue, because technically it was rough going from the different Docker versions or schema versions and then to OCI, and it's like mostly ubiquitous now. There, like you said, there are still tools or things that you assume might be OCI, and then you look and it still says Docker manifest.
People seem to be concerned about how we will be perceived if we don't release this, and I think we should also consider how we will be perceived if we do release this.
Well, and so it's sort of even like
you
somebody brings up the Fermion use case, and it's like, I think that if the refers API in the subject field is tightly coupled to the same messaging that the artifacts manifest is, then that might be part of the same confusion of like, at some point I was mentioning, I think I did it in the thread. I don't know. I've talked to so many people now of like, if there was like a card trick of like, even just like the variable that you use that pulls in, from specs.go, pulls in a certain field type, and the fact that like it's using layers and config could be mostly empty and whatever. It almost looks like a card config, like a card trick. And then you're just shoving stuff into the layers fields, and whether or not you use the config field or not, people just keep rolling and they don't really care. And they can use the refers API, then it's like, I think honestly most people would be happy. But if they get the perception that the community worked towards some particular functionality, and it's like, no, you still have that same functionality, but now we're not creating something that we're going to still be cleaning up 5 and 10 years from now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm personally frustrated that we have conflated the reference or the refers API, which I think is valuable and useful and people want, with artifact manifest, which is dubious at best. And now we
I'm not going to project that on it, but if it was, like, I mean, like, even if there was like a couple of other fields that were allowed to be optional and added, people could add them to the image type, the image manifest, and registries that didn't handle, don't know about those fields can just safely ignore them. That's fine. They'd be optional. Again, that's like back to the card trick. I'm not even going to project of dubious. Yeah.
Aaron had a few comments on the chat as well. I think the PR in its current shape doesn't address the updates to the image manifest. So you want to get it making progress. I think we should get the PR update to reflect what you wanted in the image manifest. The other point I had was there was a use case where we said no blob annotations. We need to probably consider how the image manifest with no blobs can be achieved. Because there are different behaviors in registries right now. Like 0 blob is not an option. 2-byte blobs is a different one. We don't call those specifications because the config descriptor is required. I want us to stop saying that there is no value in the artifact manifest, because a lot of these were discussed during the working group, and I've kind of held myself back from talking about this. The state is there was value in when we discussed it, because we didn't want to modify the image spec to loosen the config blob requirements. We need to modify the layers at 0 statement in the specification to say that layers is optional. We assume it's optional, but that's not how the wording is. We've discussed this a couple of times. So if we can get to image manifest and ignore the media type, which I love to forget about, and say that, yes, no blob scenarios are supported in this way, and layers is optional, then I think we get back to where we were. And I really don't care, honestly, whether the media type is artifact or image, as long as the JSON can handle those scenarios. That's kind of where the whole discussion is. So let's kind of like come back with what is the proposal that we want to make image manifest generic so that these scenarios are taken care of. Or if the scenario is not important, then we say that you have to push a dummy blob, and this is the hack you'll have to do to get to achieve that. That's also fine. So let's correct the verbiage before we and worry about the scenario, not whether we want to remove artifact or that seems like the solution. But I think the use case is still not addressed.
I can get behind that to at least make changes to image so that it can be used more better as an artifact, quote unquote artifact. John, do you want to do that in your PR? Do you want me to suggest changes? Do you want me to make a PR based on your PR?
I would love someone to PR my PR because I'm happy with my PR, and I don't know what would make people who disagree with me happy. Like, I don't really want to do the work if like it's just gonna be the same argument. So I would like someone who disagrees with me to PR what they think the diff needs to be.
And don't just revert it, that's cheating.
Is Toddy's raised hand to volunteer to PR it?
No, I do not volunteer. I just wanted to ask that wouldn't that also break kind of the goals for the OCI, but actually breaking the portability, and isn't
No,
that actually?
I think Sajay's suggestion was that we can document how to produce an effectively zero layer, effectively config free image without breaking portability. So saying things like, if you want to push an image manifest that is free of useful layers, push an empty blob or empty layer as the only blob. And if you want to make a config that's just open bracket, end bracket, documenting that would help show that we are doing this in a non-breaking way. It sucks. Like, these are the hacks you have to live through, but like, better than breaking portability. Getting a thumbs up from Brandon.
Okay,
thank you, Brandon.
Thanks.
I think we're out of time. Actually, if nobody beats me to it, I'm going to PR John's PR, but I don't know if I disagree with him enough to satisfy the requirement of someone disagreeing with him doing the PR. So, someone please otherwise do it. All right. Bye, everyone. This is a good chat.
Yeah, good chat.
Good to see you.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.